The phone buzzed at 2:07 a.m., sharp and sudden, cutting through the silence of Daniel Reed's bedroom. He woke with a jolt, heart already racing before his mind caught up. The screen glowed in the dark. One bank alert, then another, then a third. Large amounts. Charged within minutes. Daniel sat up, breath shallow. He hadn't used his card in days. His first thought was fraud. His second thought made his stomach sink. He opened the banking app, fingers tense. The transactions were real. Gas station. ATM attempt. Same location, same time. His chest tightened as the clock ticked forward. Whoever did this knew exactly where the card was. Daniel swung his legs out of bed and checked his wallet. The slot where the card should have been was empty. He didn't panic. Not yet. He moved slowly, controlled, like someone walking on thin ice. He called the bank. The representative spoke calmly, asking routine questions. Daniel answered all of them. The charges were flagged. The account temporarily frozen. The representative asked if he recognized the activity. Yes, Daniel said after a pause. I think I do. He ended the call and sat there, staring at the wall. Anger tried to rise, but something heavier pushed it down. It wasn't shock. It was recognition, a familiar pattern repeating itself. By morning, the house felt different, tense, like the air before a storm. Daniel walked into the kitchen and saw his younger brother Mark sitting at the table, hoodie pulled low, phone in hand. Mark looked relaxed, almost bored. Their mother, Elaine, stood at the stove, stirring coffee she hadn't yet poured. Daniel placed his phone on the table. Someone used my card last night. Elaine didn't turn. Mark told me. Mark shrugged without looking up. I borrowed it. The word landed wrong. Borrowed. As if permission had been given. As if timing didn't matter. At 2 a.m, Daniel asked. Mark sighed, annoyed. I needed cash. Daniel looked to his mother, waiting. Elaine finally faced him, arms crossed. You know how things are right now? He was desperate. Daniel felt a familiar tightening in his chest. This wasn't new. Mark made mistakes. Elaine explained them away. Daniel adjusted, fixed, paid. You took it while I was asleep, Daniel said. That's not borrowing. Elaine's voice sharpened. Don't turn this into a lecture. Mark rolled his eyes. You always act like a victim. Daniel studied his brother's face. No fear, no guilt, just irritation at being questioned. That hurt more than the missing money. How much did you take? Daniel asked. Mark named the amount casually, like it was pocket change. Daniel exhaled slowly. A card shouldn't have been touched. Elaine waved a hand. You'll get it back. You always do. That was the moment something inside Daniel shifted. Years of swallowed words pressed forward. He remembered covering Mark's rent, fixing his car, making excuses to relatives. Being told he was lucky, capable, strong. Being told to understand. Daniel straightened. His voice stayed calm. That account wasn't mine. Silence dropped over the kitchen. Elaine frowned. What do you mean? Daniel met her eyes. The card is linked to an account I manage. The money belongs to someone else. Mark looked up fast. What? Daniel didn't blink. It's not my personal account. Mark stood abruptly, chairs scraping the floor. You didn't say that. I didn't think I had to. Daniel replied. Elaine's face drained of color. Daniel, there are safeguards on that account, he continued. Audits, alerts, oversight. Mark's confidence cracked. Fix it, he said. Just fix it. Daniel felt the weight of the moment press down on him. He could already see what came next. Calls, questions, consequences. Elaine stepped closer, voice softer. Now, why would you keep something like that here? Daniel's jaw tightened. Because I trusted my family. Mark ran a hand through his hair, panic surfacing. You're saying I stole from a stranger? Yes. Elaine sat down slowly, as if her legs had given out. The kitchen felt smaller, colder for a long second. No one spoke. Daniel picked up his phone. The screen showed another missed call from the bank. I need time, he said, to decide what to do. Mark shook his head. You can't do this to me. Daniel looked at him, really looked at him. He saw fear now, but beneath it, he still saw expectation. The belief that Daniel would clean this up like always. Elaine reached for Daniel's arm. He's your brother. Daniel pulled away gently. I know. He walked out of the kitchen and into the hallway, the house suddenly unfamiliar. Behind him, voices rose, then fell. He didn't listen. In his room, Daniel closed the door and leaned against it. His hands trembled slightly. He wasn't sure if it was anger or something closer to relief. For the first time, he hadn't stepped in front of the fallout, and that scared him more than the betrayal itself. Daniel sat at his desk, staring at the ceiling. The kitchen argument replayed in his mind. But it wasn't the words that lingered, it was the way Mark had looked at him. Entitlement written all over his face, as if the world owed him everything, and Daniel's responsibility was to provide it. For years, Daniel had been the stabilizer, the one who cleaned up after mistakes, the one who absorbed the consequences. He had paid bills Mark ignored, covered debts Mark created, and excused. Lies Elaine chose to overlook. But now something inside him was breaking. The anger wasn't sudden. It had been growing quietly, a coiled wire beneath his calm exterior, and last night had snapped at taut. He knew Mark had crossed a line. Taking a card at 2 a.m. was reckless. Yes, but it wasn't just the act itself. It was the audacity, the assumption that Daniel would fix it without question, and Elaine's defense of Mark, her automatic instinct to protect the child who had done wrong, only sharpened Daniel's focus. He realized she had been defending Mark for years, telling herself she was protecting him, while the brunt of the consequences always fell on Daniel. Now, the time for passivity had ended. He opened his laptop and pulled up the client account the stolen card was tied to. It wasn't just money, it was a responsibility. Each transaction was tracked, monitored, and audited. He scrolled through the recent history, noting the transactions Mark had made. Gas stations, ATM withdrawal attempts. Minor amounts, but risky moves. If anything went wrong, Daniel would be liable, and he didn't intend to be. This wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was a professional one. The stakes were higher than Mark or Elaine realized. Mark didn't see the magnitude of what he had done. To him, it was borrowing money, a simple mistake that could be corrected. But Daniel understood the ripple effect. The account wasn't just numbers, it represented trust, responsibility, and a chain of consequences that extended beyond their small household. Every decision Daniel made now would have long-lasting implications. He felt a strange mix of power and hesitation. For the first time, he had leverage over Mark, a chance to reclaim control in a way. That didn't just fix the immediate problem, but addressed the pattern of entitlement. He replayed the events of that morning repeatedly. Mark shrugged, Elaine's excuses, the casual way Mark expected forgiveness. Each detail pressed in on Daniel's mind, layering anger with determination. He felt an unfamiliar thrill at the idea of holding Mark accountable, but it was tempered by the weight of morality. Could he cross this line? Could he take the step that would ensure Mark faced consequences, knowing it would fracture their relationship permanently? And Elaine, how would she react when the illusion she had built for years crumbled? Could he bear her disappointment? Her sudden realization that her protection of Mark had not been neutral but harmful to Daniel. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes, letting the tension fill him. Planning revenge wasn't simple. It wasn't about anger in the moment. It was about strategy, about timing, about ensuring the lessons were felt fully. Daniel's mind raced through options. He could quietly alert the bank, make the problem disappear for himself, but leave Mark untouched. He could confront Mark directly, demanding restitution, but risk Elaine stepping in. Or he could escalate the situation, letting consequences unfold naturally and externally. creating a situation Mark couldn't talk his way out of. Each choice carried weight. Each choice would alter their family dynamic irreversibly. Days passed in a blur. Mark's attitude changed subtly. He was anxious, pacing the house, speaking less, biting his nails at times when he thought Daniel wasn't watching. Daniel observed silently, making mental notes. This wasn't joy. Daniel wasn't relishing Mark's discomfort, but it was a reminder of the power shift. For once, the family balance didn't automatically favor the reckless sibling. Daniel allowed himself to feel the satisfaction of control, even as he questioned his own ethics. Was it fair to leverage fear for justice? Was revenge the right tool, or was there another path that would teach the lesson without cruelty? Elaine tried to intervene. She approached Daniel one afternoon, her voice quiet but firm. "We can handle this quietly," she said. "You don't need to escalate. He's your brother." Daniel listened without responding. He recognized her plea not as concern for Mark, but as a way to preserve her own peace. She didn't want conflict. She didn't want to see the consequences of years of enabling play out. Her fear was protective, yes, but it was also of saving. Daniel realized that no one in his family would act on principle. They would act on comfort. That left him alone to decide. Mark eventually came to Daniel's room, a mixture of fear and desperation in his eyes. "Please," he said, "I'll fix it. I'll pay it back. Just don't tell anyone." The words were heavy with panic, but the tone carried entitlement too. Daniel noted the patterns, saw the unbroken habit of expecting rescue. He didn't respond immediately. He let the moment stretch. Every second he delayed was a lesson in itself. The fear, the uncertainty, it was a mirror of what he had felt countless times when Mark acted and Daniel silently bore the consequences at night. Daniel lay awake, thinking through every possible scenario. If he exposed the truth, Mark would face legal consequences and Elaine would be forced to reckon with her decisions. If he didn't, the cycle would continue. Mark would grow bolder, and Daniel would remain the invisible fixer, absorbing damage. Silently, the moral dilemma twisted in his mind. Revenge could be more than punishment. It could be a statement, a declaration that boundaries existed. But it could also backfire, creating fractures that might never heal. He drafted emails made, phone calls he didn't send, calculated outcomes, and mapped risks. Each choice brought him closer to understanding what justice meant for him and what it meant for a family that had long valued comfort over truth. He wrestled with guilt for considering consequences that could hurt Mark, with unease for challenging Elaine's instinct to protect, and with excitement at finally holding control. His emotional struggle became almost physical, the tension in his shoulders, the tightness in his chest, the restless movement in his legs, all a manifestation of the mental calculus he could not pause. Daniel watched Mark unravel. The brother, who had once been carefree and entitled, now flinched at each word Daniel spoke, now hesitated at every move, weighed every step. Daniel felt the shift, a validation of years of quiet endurance. The power was in his hands, and he realized that control itself was part of the revenge. Not violence, not malice, but the ability to dictate consequences, to make the reckless face responsibility. This was the satisfaction he hadn't known he craved. Even as he planned, Daniel remained self-aware. He did not want to become cruel. He did not want the act of revenge to consume him. He wanted Mark to see the consequences, Elaine to understand the cost of enabling, and himself to reclaim agency over his own life. The moral tension was constant. Was this for justice, or was it simply gratification masked as principle? He considered walking away, ignoring the situation, preserving his own ethics, but the risk of repetition, of seeing Mark shrug again and expect forgiveness, made that impossible. Each day, the anticipation built. Each interaction with Mark became a chess move. Daniel observed calculated, planned, and waited. He understood that timing would determine the impact. A hasty decision would be wasted, ineffective. Patience, observation, and precision became his tools. By holding back, he increased the weight of his eventual decision. Mark's fear, Elaine's uncertainty. The looming potential for consequences, all of it was part of the psychological architecture Daniel was building. Finally, Daniel reached a point where inaction was no longer safe. Waiting had clarified. The stakes sharpened his resolve. The choice before him was stark: act and force accountability, or retreat and accept a lifetime of quiet sacrifice. The struggle had transformed from anger into strategy, from frustration into clarity. Revenge had taken shape not as impulsive retaliation, but as a deliberate moral calculation. Every feeling he had: resentment, fear, anticipation. And even the slightest thrill of authority had led to this pivotal moment, setting the stage for the climax where all of this planning and reflection would face reality. Daniel had wrestled with the weight of family, loyalty, betrayal, and morality. And now he knew the next step would define not just the consequences for Mark, but the identity of Daniel himself. He wasn't just seeking payback. He was seeking a boundary, a truth, a recognition that his tolerance had limits. The tension of those days, the quiet observation, and the internal debate had built the perfect storm for the final confrontation. He wasn't yet ready to act, but he was ready to decide. Daniel woke early, the sun filtering through the blinds but failing to warm the tension in his chest. The previous days had been a storm of calculation, observation, and internal struggle. Mark had been restless, Elaine hovering nervously, and Daniel knew the time for indecision was ending. Stay? He would face the ultimate choice: act or step back. The consequences loomed large, not just for Mark, but for the fragile balance of their family and the integrity Daniel had spent years protecting. He sat at his desk, the laptop open, emails and transaction histories glowing softly on the screen. Each line of data was a reminder of the stakes. The client account was not his personal money. It was someone else's life, someone's trust placed in him. The transactions Mark had made were minor in amount but monumental in principle. Any misstep could escalate beyond a simple family dispute. Daniel's fingers hovered over the keyboard, the urge to take immediate action clashing with the desire to weigh the moral cost. Mark entered the room quietly, unsure if he should approach. "Daniel, please," he said, voice tight. "I'll do anything. Just don't let this ruin me." His eyes were wide, filled with desperation, guilt, and a hint of fear Daniel hadn't seen before. Daniel studied him carefully. This was the brother who had always assumed he could act without consequence. Now he was vulnerable, exposed, and unsure. Daniel felt a strange mix of satisfaction and heaviness in his chest. He had the power. But what would using it do to them all? Elaine appeared behind Mark, placing a cautious hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to destroy him," she said, her voice trembling. "He's your brother. Think about what this will do to the family." Daniel looked at her. He saw fear and love intertwined, but also self-interest. Her instinct had always been to protect Mark, often at Daniel's expense. That pattern had allowed him to shoulder the consequences silently. This time, Daniel realized he would have to decide alone. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Revenge, he understood, wasn't about immediate satisfaction. It was about clarity, justice, and setting boundaries. He imagined two scenarios, one in which he silently corrected the problem, absorbing the weight again, keeping the illusion of harmony, and another in which he exposed the truth, forcing accountability, shattering illusions, and demanding responsibility. The first path promised comfort but perpetuated the cycle of exploitation. The second was harsh, irreversible, and morally complicated, but it promised honesty and boundaries. He reopened his eyes, staring at Mark, who fidgeted nervously, trying to anticipate what Daniel might do. Mark's sense of entitlement was cracking, replaced by fear. He muttered apologies, repeated promises of restitution. Daniel noticed the repetition. It was a tactic, a habit, a way to try and manipulate outcomes. But this time, Daniel was immune to manipulation. He'd observed, calculated, and weighed every variable. He knew the consequences, and he understood his responsibility not only to himself, but to the client whose trust had been compromised. Daniel's phone rang, piercing the silence. It was the bank's fraud department. The call was short, formal, businesslike. Daniel listened, responding carefully. The situation had escalated. If action wasn't taken immediately, the account could be frozen, flagged, or reported further, affecting not just Mark, but the client. The ticking clock reminded him that indecision had a cost. The moment of choice was no longer theoretical. Light was real, pressing, unavoidable. Mark looked at Daniel, panic rising in his eyes. "You're going to tell them, aren't you?" His voice cracked. Daniel remained silent, letting the tension stretch. The power in that silence was palpable. Mark's fear was no longer abstract. It was immediate. Elaine's posture shifted, uneasy. She had defended him for years, but the calm, measured presence of Daniel now made her doubt the safety of her old approach. Finally, Daniel spoke. "I'm not doing this to hurt you," he said slowly, choosing words with care. "I'm doing this so it stops. Not just tonight, not just with this card, but the pattern. The excuses, the assumption that I'll always fix things for you." He felt the weight of the truth in the room. Mark flinched. Elaine's eyes widened. Daniel's voice was steady, unwavering. "It's time. There are consequences. Real ones. And you will face them." He picked up the phone and made the call. The conversation was precise, professional, and factual. Daniel explained the unauthorized transactions, outlined the risk, and confirmed the account details. There was no malice, no dramatics, just the facts. He provided evidence and ensured that Mark's actions could not be overlooked or excused. The call ended, and Daniel set the phone down, his hands steady despite the tension still coiling inside. Mark slumped into a chair, silent, absorbing the reality he had avoided for so long. Elaine stood frozen, her hand over her mouth, processing the implications of Daniel's decision. The weight of their silence was almost deafening. No one spoke for minutes. Daniel felt a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and a quiet sense of resolution. He adapted. The choice had been made, and the moral responsibility rested firmly on the truth, not on fear, manipulation, or family loyalty. The aftermath was immediate, but contained. Mark would face restitution, counseling, and oversight. Elaine would have to reconcile her protective instincts with the consequences of enabling. And Daniel, he would finally have space, boundaries, and the freedom of action without silent burden. He felt no triumph, no joy in punishment. The satisfaction was subtle, rooted in clarity and justice rather than revenge for its own sake. He had demonstrated the consequences of betrayal, and he had protected the integrity of responsibilities beyond the household. As the day progressed, Daniel watched Mark adjust, quietly accepting guidance and rules for restitution. The fear and guilt were visible, but tempered with understanding. Elaine approached Daniel later, voice soft, eyes tired. "I thought I was protecting him," she said. "I realize now I was protecting myself." Daniel nodded. He understood. The lesson had been painful but necessary. Daniel reflected on his actions. Revenge, he realized, didn't have to be loud or destructive, didn't have to be vindictive. Sometimes it was simply holding people accountable, creating boundaries, and refusing to be exploited. The emotional weight of decision-making, observation, and moral deliberation had been immense, but the clarity it brought was invaluable. He had navigated fear, loyalty, and betrayal, and emerged with control over his own life and integrity. By evening, the house felt different. The tension lingered, but it was no longer oppressive. It had shifted into awareness, responsibility, and understanding. Mark had learned a lesson he could not ignore. Elaine had confronted uncomfortable truths about protection and enablement. Daniel finally had reclaimed agency, no longer silent in the face of repeated wrongs. The family dynamic had changed irrevocably, but justice had been served, not with anger, but with clarity and principle. Daniel understood that this was the real payoff. Revenge had been about control, boundaries, and the enforcement of truth. It was not about malice or malignment, but about accountability. The lesson was clear. Betrayal carries consequences, and repeated enabling erodes trust, not loyalty. And as Daniel moved through the house that evening, he felt an unfamiliar weight lift from his shoulders. The cycle was broken not through cruelty, but through deliberate, principled action. He knew the road ahead would be complicated. There would be conversations, adjustments, and lingering discomfort. But Daniel had made his choice with awareness and care. The balance of power had shifted, responsibility had been enforced, and integrity preserved. Revenge, he realized, was not about satisfaction. It was about truth, boundaries, and the courage to act when hesitation could no longer be tolerated. And, for Daniel, that knowledge was the closest thing to peace he had ever experienced in his home.